Today's a very special episode. We have my friend and co-writer in creating comedy gold for YouTube with hits like 16 Personalities and Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory. Not only is he a master at illustrating Myers-Briggs types with a twist of humor, but he's also earning a master's degree in marriage and family therapy. From the therapy room to the writing desk, Jeffrey will delve into his unique insights on relationships, the power of personality types in therapy, and what it's like to deal with my antics as a co-writer. And get ready to hear about his MBTI rap series and why certain personality types are a challenge to write for. Buckle up and let's dive in. So what specifically is the degree that you're going for?
So I am getting a degree in marriage and family therapy, a master's of science in marriage and family therapy.
So that is, is it possible to just get a general therapy degree? Hey, I can be a therapist now, or do you have to specialize in something?
You've got to find some kind of pathway. So there are obviously many points of entry, and to the point that I was like, hey, maybe I should just be a life coach, but I wanted something with like a little more gravitas. So you can be like a social worker, you can be a licensed counselor, you can be a marriage and family therapist, psychologist. There are probably a couple things in there that I've overlooked, but yeah, you've got a few pathways.
So family and marriage counseling, I'm guessing that this has to do more with like interpersonal relationships. Like, what is the focus that specialization, what does that focus in on?
The way that I think about it, it really boils down to seeing things kind of in a systemic way. So I could work with an individual, but even in working with that individual, I want to be aware of like the social resources in their life, the social supports in their life, and also it kind of gets down to that like Buddhist idea of interdependence. Like, okay, so you're dealing with this problem, but how do the people in your life help to maintain that problem or alleviate that problem? So it's just kind of thinking big picture, comprehensive, to really have a full picture of, what is actually going on here, and we can intervene at the level of the individual, we can intervene at the level of like an interpersonal dyad or the family, or some people kind of want to go like the community advocacy cultural level. That's usually not something that I'm too hyped about, but there are different options for where to intervene. And so I do work with a lot of couples, but I also work with a lot of individuals. I work with some kids, so I think I was drawn to it because of that flexibility, and because to me it is like a very comprehensive approach that like acknowledges the complexity of what it is to be a person.
So that's interesting that it's not just like, okay, I have to see two or more people at once. It's about connecting what you're doing to those things. Like theoretically, someone would be coming to you being like, I know these issues come from my family somehow, or my marriage, or whatever.
Right.
Okay, so would it be, if you went into practice, would it be the kind of thing where you're just like on your website, hey, I'm open for anyone to come work with me, or would you be like, hey, come to me if you have these specific kind of issues? Like, I don't even know how that works when you're going into practice, how you make it clear to people what you do best, or or like ethically, what are you supposed to even say?
Right. I mean, that's a really good question, and I think it's something that I'm still figuring out to some degree. But I will like go out of my way to look at Psychology Today profiles of people who are already established mental health practitioners in my city, just so I can see how they're kind of framing what they do. And people are usually pretty upfront. Like, I feel most competent dealing with anxiety, depression, some of the more like general things, and then other people are way more specialized, and they work with eating disorders, or they work with borderline, so on and so forth. So I probably, just knowing myself, eventually I will kind of bill myself as like more of a generalist.
Yeah.
But that's still some ways away.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, because it's like, years ago when I was looking for a therapist, I was, trying to triangulate all these things where I'd look at the Psychology Today profiles, and I'd look at also like the insurance, listings of doctors, which are more or less useless, and then also their own website, and see like, what is this really all about? Because on Psychology Today, it'll be like, this person specializes in, and then it'll list like everything in the DSM, and you're like, well, okay. Right. Yeah, it's like, well, I mean, I know about all these things, but like, do you really specialize in all these things? And like this, the therapist I ended up going with, probably, like, I don't know what her specialty is. I think it was just like, it might have even been something like trauma, like something that I wasn't having to deal with, but I just looked on her website and I was like, I like her vibe, let me go with her. It's so interesting, the whole picking a therapist, because it's such, because there's the whole therapist search. Luckily I found mine on the first go, but I know a lot of people, it's like they have to go through a few to find the right one.
Right.
And obviously you're still in school for it, but have you started to formulate what the ideal client would look like?
When I first started, I had these highfalutin ideas that, like, I want to work with people who are trying to self-actualize, people who are trying to, like, quote unquote individuate, and then I got in the trenches. Type stuff. Yeah, exactly. That was the connection for me. And then I got in the trenches, and one of the major drawbacks, and maybe blessings, it's hard to know, of being a student therapist is typically, you're offering services at a discounted rate, meaning you're like helping people who really have a high need and who don't have other resources to kind of like help buffer them from, the pains of reality. So, I'm not working with those. I was thinking I'm going to be working with people who are like level 99, and we're going to get to 100 through like a lot of introspection and maybe some like dream analysis. Who knows? But I had this like particular vision that that's kind of the ideal client for me. And, as time's gone on, and there's like the ideal, and then there's what happens when the rubber meets the road. And I am seeing that there is like a pretty high need for a lot of therapists, even people who go into marriage and family therapy, are scared to work with couples. So they might do it as like a student for their internship, but especially high conflict couples, people get really scared. And so that's one pathway that seems like not only lucrative because there's a great need for it, but also, just a place where I could maybe optimally be helpful, because I, at least so far, haven't like internalized a lot of like the anxiety and tension when I am working with couples like that. So that's one thing that I've kind of considered as, an area of focus for me, or like an ideal client for me.
Yeah. So obviously I know why I would want to avoid being in that situation, but what do you think it is that most people don't want to, why they're afraid of getting into the couples therapy gig?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people who want to be therapists are also in their own way like people who are wounded healers, and they have their own traumas and they have their own blind spots. And I think, part of that kind of, as a result of that, people don't like a lot of like highly emotional, highly combative situations. It might kind of, bring them back to their own stuff that they haven't fully worked through. And so, you kind of have to pick and choose like what your tolerance is for distress in those situations. But then there's also like legal implications, ethical implications. Are there children involved? If this couple does end up getting a divorce, then, are you going to be called into court? That's something that like terrifies me. I don't really ever want to have to deal with that.
Oh, I never thought about that.
Yeah, right. So like, are you going to advocate for one parent on the behalf of another, or advocate for one parent and like supportive custody for the child? Things like that are also highly stressful. And finally, it's difficult not to, I do this too, it's difficult not to take on more responsibility than you should, to do like more work than your clients are doing, and to then feel somehow responsible, like, oh, it didn't work out. They are getting a divorce, and maybe there was something that I could do better. So, you know, if you're going to be working with that kind of client system, then you have to be prepared for the fact that not everybody's going to make it work, and that's not really your fault. You know, you're just there to be like a resource.
Right. Yeah, I do understand like what you mean there, because I think a lot of people would go into that situation being like, I gotta save these people's marriage, I gotta play the hero, but that's not even in your control.
Right.
So do you think that you are a ENTP with a very scientific Myers-Briggs system? Do you think that your personality type sets you up to be particularly well suited for that kind of potentially high stress environment?
That's a really good question. I think to a degree, yes. And I think there's like a pathway for like most personality types. You know, there are different models, different interventions that I think are more or less compatible with different typologies, and also different problems or different client bases that are, you know, depending on who you are, you know, it can be harder or easier. But I do think that just in general, I notice that a lot of thinkers are actually drawn to this field. Mm-hmm. And I think that might be counterintuitive. I mean, I'm guessing at the types of a lot of my peers, but I think that's connected to some degree to this idea that, you know, I've been to therapy. I've done my own work. I know that a lot of the emotional stuff isn't intuitive to me. It doesn't like always make sense. But I think that having the FE, you know, like a little higher, a little more activated, you know, once I assimilate it, then I'm like, okay, cool. I know how to work with this. And now it's like this really precious thing that I've discovered that I want to then go back to the world and give to the world. So there's that, like the ability to maybe remain a little bit pulled back from, detached from the emotional conflict, but also, you know, it's not too far out of reach for me, and I've done my own work, and it feels really powerful to kind of give that to someone else and to create space for that healing.
Right. So it's like, because the feeling is not the default, it's something that you are more aware of when you are having to use it to sort something out.
Yeah. And then one other thing I'll say about being an ENTP in relation to doing therapy, I think one thing that makes therapy effective is merely getting another perspective, like shaking up your little snow globe and introducing a little visual static. You know, I think I'm really good at asking questions, and I'm really good at like saying something that might change the way that someone sees something, even slightly, that kind of like opens up the door for a new way to think about a problem. And this also kind of gets back to that whole systemic idea that I mentioned before. Like, yeah, you can intervene with a person, you can intervene with a couple, with a family, but even within the individual, there are different levels of intervention. Like, you can intervene at the level of, like at the somatic level by like introducing like meditations or forms of breathing, or you can intervene cognitively. That's what CBT is all about, right? So there are these different nested systems, and I think I work really well obviously with like the more cognitive stuff, just by introducing that fresh perspective that can then like change the whole system and reconfigure what's going on.
Well, and if we get into the weeds of typology, you could say that it's also beneficial, because it's like, if you need to say something that is going to challenge someone else, you've got that TI that's just like, okay, well, yeah, I'm going to use that. And maybe you'll sugarcoat it a little bit, but it's a bit different than if an FE person was trying to do that. They would really feel, I feel like an FE person really is going to feel the need to like put this little kernel of challenge in like a big package of, you know, oh yeah, I understand your feelings, blah, 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 which might end up ultimately clouding the true nugget of wisdom, or not even wisdom, just like, trying to change their perspective in there. It might make things like way more inefficient.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is one of the dangers, I think, of purely relying on validating as like a therapeutic technique, because people kind of want to induct you into their worldview and kind of sustain the problem that they're going through. So if it's mostly focused on like, oh, that sounds really hard for you, or like, getting kind of like a cheerleading session, then sometimes that kind of just counterproductively, ironically sustains the problem, because it creates like a little space for like, I can vent about this, and now I'm getting a little bit of validation, I'm getting a little bit of warmth, and I've let off steam. But maybe it is time for, I'm not trying to deride that approach completely, but maybe this is the moment for a little more challenge or something that does shake things up.
Yeah. How do you know when to make that judgment call? And I'm even just wondering if someone is going on and they're monologuing, and maybe even they fall quiet for a moment. Because I remember thinking back to my therapy sessions, there were a lot of times where my therapist would just kind of sit and wait.
Yeah.
How do you read that and know, like, when should I interject something? When should I challenge them? When should I tell them to keep going? And when should I just sit back and wait?
I think it's a tough judgment call to make. It's a really good question, and I'm not sure that I have it figured out, because there have been times when I have pushed something, I think, at the wrong moment, and I've ended up maybe damaging the relationship a little bit. So, I think part of it is that you need to do a lot of that validating and a lot of that connection building up front. Maybe like the first however many sessions, 4 or 5 sessions, are really just about building that container, that sense of safety. This is a person that I feel like I can vent to. And then on the other end, from my perspective, that also creates, enough time for me to start getting a sense of the pattern of what's going on for the person. So I can start to see, like, when we approach this particular conversation point, there's either like a shutdown, or there's a unexpected change of topic, or, whatever the case may be. That kind of helps me begin to like build that roadmap of like, okay, here's where like the trigger spots are, and how much are they deflecting. I tend to think that the things that people are trying to avoid in therapy are the places that you want to go, even if it seems like it's kind of unrelated to the problem. But sometimes you kind of have to take like a circular path to getting there. So yeah, it's really about taking time, testing the waters, seeing what sticks, seeing what's getting deflected, and maybe easing towards the deflection points once you've built that relationship and they know that they can lean on you and they know that you kind of want what's in their best interest.
Yeah, and talking about noticing the patterns, has knowing the framework of personality types helped you in dealing with clients?
It has helped me minimally.
Yeah.
I can make sense of certain things that I'm seeing in typological terms, but I think part of the problem with the kind of program that I'm doing, so it's a 2-year program, but I'm being thrown in the deep end. I was doing therapy the first month of being in the program, and so it's very experiential. You're learning as you go. There's a lot of, you're learning models of therapy that I've never thought about before. This like systemic way of assessing and seeing things at these fractal levels is like, it's a lot of, it creates a pretty heavy mental load. And so I feel like I haven't had enough time to start like drawing all the dots to the typology, because I'm learning this entirely new therapeutic language. I didn't study psychology as an undergrad.
Yeah.
My interest in psychology is, literally armchair, like learning on the internet, being into typology, things like that. So I think as time goes on, my point is that as time goes on, I think I'll begin to draw more of those connections, but I can already see, little glimmers of how type can be helpful in therapy.
Yeah, I mean, and I can also see how knowing it might not really be that helpful. Like, it might get you to some kind of understanding on your own part a little faster than if you didn't. But
Right.
it's like if you're talking to a client and you're like, oh, this person's an ESTJ because I can tell that they're just avoiding their emotions. It's like any psychologist would or any therapist would pick up they're avoiding their emotions without knowing typology.
Right.
I mean, maybe the potential there is with couples specifically, or even just people talking about their interactions with their families, because you might be able to theoretically pick up on especially communication issues where people of different types are talking about the same thing, but they're not really, because they're using like different types of language. You know, if you get an FE and a TE talking to each other, they're going to be like focusing on different parts of the problem, which, again, any therapist will be able to pick up eventually. But I think working from that framework of personality types, you might be able to see more immediately, because that's what your mind is looking for, is these communication styles. Have you? I mean, specifically in those couple things, have you seen the type dynamics at play there, or maybe have you not? Is it still kind of like something unexplored for you?
I definitely see certain things. You mentioned the idea of like an ESTJ being in therapy, and obviously they're avoiding their emotions. And I think, as I said before, I think a lot of thinkers end up getting drawn, or end up like realizing, hey, it might be beneficial to have a space for processing my emotions. So I see a lot of thinkers, even in couples, like thinkers paired up, maybe like an introverted thinker with an extroverted thinker. And so, from that framework, if a lot of people coming in are more on the thinking side, then it becomes kind of difficult for me to see like what's going on type wise. I'm not really seeing like a clear like opposites attract sort of thing, but I do see a lot of introvert with extrovert. Like this person clearly like pulls in when times get tough, and this person is like going out to battle. They're going to war when times get a little tough. I do see like, okay, more introverted decider, judger, or extroverted. Those are the main things that are pretty apparent to me. And then also, I think that kind of ties in as well to just people who are more, well, I don't know. I want to measure what I say. I feel like I might go off the rails. I think I might like start guessing a little too much about what I'm seeing, and then sabotage myself as a therapist.
Well, I mean, do they in school, do they teach you Big Five and ask you to think about that at all?
Yeah, only a little bit. So I have one class that my first semester, it was all about assessment stuff, just getting all the information you need. And one of the readings we did was actually about looking at different personality dimensions when you're working with couples, so that you can then introduce that kind of like, hey, you might be meaning this, but you could mean something entirely different. And it talked about Big Five, but it also talked about, MBTI style personality, the Jungian personality stuff. And I do think that, you kept pointing out how like, okay, well, a therapist is going to see a lot of this stuff independent of like having this framework, but it can be helpful from my perspective. Like type kind of just introduces a way of thinking about things and kind of normalizes that we see things differently.
Yeah.
So just like giving that to clients, I think could be helpful, just to like get that conversation going. But then at the end of the day, especially as a therapist, it's just going to fall back on, I need to be curious. I need to like not let my own assumptions take over. So like asking, well, what do you mean by fidelity? Your partner, you guys are talking about fidelity, but do you even mean the same thing? And so, just asking a lot of questions, unearths, a lot of that stuff that maybe personality can be like, it can be a shortcut to, or it can be like a springboard, but at the end of the day, you still have to have like the hard conversations.
Yeah, it is interesting. Something I've been thinking about recently is how, the difference between this is how I am and this is how I choose to be. And I think when you're trying to, when you're trying to figure yourself or someone else out and what makes you tick and whatever, and even if you find like these things are, this is just how I am, that having that personality thing is sort of like a backdrop, a backstop to be like, well, why am I like this? Well, this is why. It's the type, So that, I do see that could be useful, because I think a lot of people just assume if someone is different than them, it's because they decide to act that way, and it's not because that's sort of just like intrinsically where they see, how they feel like they have to act or where they have to go. I mean, but it's tricky because you don't want to just like pile everything on. Well, you can't help it because of your type, but I do think that is sort of just like the gravity. It's maybe it is like you choose to be that way, but it's also because there is a gravity of the personality type pulling you towards that, and it's not just like I'm totally neutral and I decided to do this.
Right. Yeah, I like the gravity kind of imagery there, and I think that. Yeah, you don't want to use your type ever to like excuse a particular way of being, but you also have to be realistic about like where you are and, what kind of car you're driving. And so what kind of fuel can you put in that car versus, just being realistic about those differences will allow you to work effectively with those differences. And then another thing that I probably should say regarding personality and therapy, this is not something that I put into application too much yet, but I'm kind of playing with this idea of, it's called the appropriately unusual. So there's a particular model of therapy called collaborative therapy, and one of their big, I don't even know if you can call it technique, but framework is this idea of using what's appropriately unusual. So people get stuck. That's why they come into therapy. They're stuck for all sorts of reasons, and going back to what I said before, you can kind of see where the like sore spots are, the things that you really don't want to touch too much without maybe hurting the therapeutic relationship. So you want to like find something that is like kind of counter to whatever this worldview is and this behavior pattern that is getting them stuck. You want to find something that's unusual, but it like feels familiar and appropriately unusual. And so instead of going right for like the killing blow, you want to find some kind of like middle ground, right? That's kind of like the basic idea of it. So I've been thinking about that in typological terms of like, okay, so if I am working with a thinker, whatever their like stated verbalized problem is, I have a pretty strong theory that they will at least be like filtering it through the prism of their feeling function.
Yeah.
So it'll like kind of bring up the baggage associated with that. And so I don't want to like directly go to, well, how do you feel about that?
Right.
Because I think that in the long run, they're either not going to give me much or it might actually scare them off of therapy if I push too hard. So, okay, let's say they're like an ISTP. I'm thinking of like that appropriately unusual idea as involving like going to the third function to access the fourth function. Thinking that they might be kind of, there's like a loose alliance between the first and the second, a loose alliance between the third and the fourth. So, that third function is usually something that we can kind of tap into in that hobby state. We have some curiosity about it. We feel like we can grow there a little bit more than the fourth function. So, long story short, I've been thinking like, how can I leverage a person's third function, whatever that function happens to be, in order to shake up the system, get things flowing, get them to like maybe try even one thing different. So, maybe for somebody who is, thinking and then sensing, I might start asking more of those questions of like, what about this perspective? Or have you thought about the way this person's seeing it? Or what's another interpretation of that? And then hopefully that's, sufficient to get the ball rolling and just introduce enough chaos without being too frightening.
Right. Okay. So I'm not sure that I understand the appropriately unusual. So that basically a what's the word I'm looking for? A general approach, and it's sort of like say something that's, you want to ask something or say something that is just a little bit beyond their scope of what they think the problem is, what the way they see things. So it's like challenging them, but it's not. It's like here's their bubble. Here's where you think the real problem is. So you're saying something that's like here. So it's drawing them towards that where you think they need to go. But if you were to say, let's go here immediately, they'd be like, no way.
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect encapsulation of it.
That's fascinating to think, like trying to go to the third function. It's like slowly, easing them into the waters of that non-preferred side. Especially when you are dealing with if you were dealing with an IP or EJ, because then you're just kind of looking at it through that intuition or sensing lens, where it's asking them to, let's see, what would it really be if you take away intuition and sensing, it's just like organizing versus gathering. Just asking them to so for an ISTP it would be like, well, let's why don't we just kind of like try to reduce, what do you think the big picture of this is, like in one concept.
Right.
That's really interesting, because it will start to get them thinking out of that usual mode of TISE in this example, and then kind of theoretically maybe open them up a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope. And, like, to use myself as an example, if I'm like in a huge depressive slump, and what's most helpful to me is like to develop a sense of routine and to actually pay attention to my body and to pay attention to my patterns, and maybe do a little journaling to reflect on what's actually happening, in detail, sensor detail in my life.
Yeah.
And that's difficult for me.
Yeah.
That's maybe a no-go. At least I'm now like conscious enough that I can maybe choose to undergo the torment there. But I might have better luck like going out and like volunteering, helping other people, doing something that pulls me out of my own head, and then maybe as like an unexpected result of that, I might end up kind of building those routines anyway, or it'll just force me to pay a little more attention to that generally unconscious, like, black spot on the map of my life.
Yeah. Because I think back to my own experiences in therapy, and it's like it was easy for me to just be like, here's all the things I felt. And it's funny because now looking back on it, it was kind of like a weird FE thing of like sort of hoping that the therapist would be like, yes, what you felt was appropriate. Those are the correct emotions to have. And then also being like, here's, generally how they were all related. But then there would always be that time where it's like, okay, now I've got to like do the TI part and figure out like why was I feeling all this? Why am I where I am now? And why, like, how do I put this all together to move forward, and, to like kind of resolve this and move forward? How do I put that puzzle together? Or even just like blaming myself, like figuring like everyone else's perspective was the correct one, and then switching around and be like, okay, well, how am I actually the one who's right in these situations? Or why shouldn't I feel bad for these other things? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, embracing your own standpoint more.
Yeah. Because, and I'm not sure what the ultimate, like, theoretically, this is such a typology nerd conversation right now, but like, what theoretically would have been the SE thing that I wouldn't have wanted to go to? Like, you got to shake up everything right now. You got to do everything differently. That you change up all these old patterns you have.
Right. It's like, okay, maybe you can assimilate the SE chaos a little more if that chaos is coming from standing on your own feet, embracing your perspective, honoring what you think is true, and then that takes the edge off a little bit.
Yeah,
it is very theoretical.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I'm hoping that like I can apply these ideas a little more as I work with people and really see if it pays off. But I'm liking it as a framework for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes sense also that right now you are learning a lot of like the actual being a therapist bit. So like that's the more important thing to put
Yeah.
your brain power into, and then once that is mastered, once you then you can kind of assimilate the personality stuff into it.
Yeah. I will say, it's really funny sometimes to work with couples where like, let's say you have like husband and wife duo, and the wife is, very more verbally expressive and going, really just like giving it to him, talking a lot, sharing a lot with me, feeling, and then like the dude is kind of just like, and then this has happened multiple times, then she might say something like, and it's hard because I'm just such an introvert, and he's just such an extrovert, and so
That's
and
hilarious.
like, maybe it's we'll see.
Yeah. It's interesting. That reminds me of in our previous conversations, you mentioned that you were reading through 7 Principles That Make Marriage Work, which I'm sure is very helpful for your work. There it is right there. And I've read a lot of it or listened to a lot of it on audiobook. That one of the interesting things that I remember from that is talking about, and I don't remember precisely, maybe since you've read it more recently, the part where it's talking about like the way that men and women generally feel emotions more. It's like men are much more likely to be flooded, like emotionally flooded, and that's why men like stereotypically shut down in a lot of these situations, because women don't really feel that in this. Like, sure, women are emotional, but the way they were describing it, if I recall correctly, is sort of like women don't feel those extreme spikes of emotion that make them feel like fight or flight response to like the simple things, whereas I feel like men can get into an argument that to a woman just seems just nothing, but they will get emotionally flooded and shut down. Do you know what I'm talking about in the book?
Absolutely, yeah. I haven't even read that much of the book, but I did read that part really recently, so it's pretty fresh in my memory. And I think, he kind of links it to this like evolutionary perspective where like, historically speaking, men were like going out into the world. They were doing the hunter-gatherer thing. And so, if you're encountering something that's like an obstacle or something that's triggering, it's because your like life is in danger and you really need to be on guard. And I see that in my own life. I think that I have that tendency to kind of like, oh, this difficult discussion is like the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
And, I'm fighting for my life out here.
Yeah. I feel it too, and I think that this goes beyond like a simple explanation of personality type, because it's like, I'm a feeler, but it's still like my wife will say something like, oh, you didn't scrape off the plate in the dishwasher, and I'll just like shut down. And it's like tough because now that I'm aware of it, I know that's like this is just what's happening, and it's not because of what she said, it's just because of my reaction to it. And I think it's
not a dinosaur, it's just your wife.
Yeah, I know. It's and I think it is kind of a universal male experience, and I think a lot of people don't realize it. I saw a play recently where it was like a very feminist play. It's getting into too much extra information, but one of the lines that stuck out to me is like, and it was a comedy, so these 2 women were complaining about their husbands or whatever. I'm like, yeah, men are so sensitive. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. When you think about it, it's like because they get so easily emotionally flooded and shut down, and then society a lot of times doesn't try to give men the tools they need to work with that. And I think a lot of people just don't understand that it's not that men don't have feelings, it's that they just don't feel like they can express them, and then when they feel them too intensely, it's like they don't know what to do except to kind of just keep it down,
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of that sense of, if I express this, I'm concerned I'm going to harm the relationship in some way. So I just need to, step away, cool off, realize that this person that I'm dealing with isn't a dinosaur or isn't some panther chasing me down, but is just my partner who has And every other situation, showed me that this is a safe situation for me to be in.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I think typologically, I think there probably still are differences in how it plays out, but, maybe like for someone who is more archetypically a feeler, maybe they're like stepping away and then they're actually like, I need time to actually sort through like what it is that I'm feeling and, where this feeling is coming from. I think I will be more inclined to just like, I need to like pull away for a second until this feeling goes away.
Yeah.
And then I can come back out.
Yeah. There are a lot of the nuances there. It's interesting how it's like people can have the same experience in general, but there are the nuances that the different types will have.
Yeah.
Here's a weird question, which might be stepping over some boundaries here, but have you ever seen any, experience something in couples therapy? You've seen something in another couple that has taught you something about your own relationship? Which, it could be anything. It could be, a very small thing. It could be kind of a general broad thing. Because the reason I think about that is, not that I've seen it in anyone else, but marriage is tough because, it's just tough to live with another human being, but that's not so much it, as that you start to realize I am tough to live with, like and especially with moments of being maybe a little too sensitive, I recognize this in myself, and it's like, I need to stop being a little B word. Like I'm letting my irrational kind of like triggers just make me into someone who's not very fun to be around. Mm-hmm. So that's something I'm working on now, is like, how do I calm that and realize it's not a big deal.
Yeah. I think generally speaking, there are definitely moments where I've kind of seen myself reflected, especially in a lot of my male clients who are kind of like new to learning this language of, what is therapy? What are feelings? What do I, how do I handle this? So I do see, that kind of mirrored back at me. And then I think this is sort of answering your question, but just in general, it's been really helpful to learn all these frameworks for thinking about what goes wrong in relationships. And then as I'm kind of applying it clinically, I'm also seeing, this is relevant to my own life. And this is something that I can incorporate to make my own relationships better, generally speaking. And, for example, there's this, one of the major models for working with couples is called EFT, emotionally focused therapy. And, it's all about how people kind of get caught up in a particular dance, a particular tango. So like, when I and Hillary don't see eye to eye, there is a predictable kind of pattern of like who's doing what, and then that like learning to see that pattern play out again and again, and seeing how, there's a lot going on cognitively. Like you do one thing, I see it, I interpret it this way, yada yada yada. But the main thing that I took away from learning about that model is that, we have like primary emotions and secondary emotions. And so we often, in those tense fight or flight moments, we are often responding with something like anger or shutting down completely. And so this model is like, well, hey, like what's underneath that though? Like what's underneath the anger that you're feeling? And so it might be something like, yes, I'm angry that you didn't put away the dishes, but really what I'm feeling is I'm feeling very alone, and I'm feeling like I'm doing this by myself, and I really want to feel like I'm in a partnership right now. So I don't want to feel that loneliness. I want to feel closer to you. And so it's like learning to see that there's like a bid for connection, and there's a reaching underneath all of these initially kind of extreme stances that we take. Talking about the shutdown from earlier, shutdown can be, if you reframe it, it's like, okay, I want to protect this relationship because I am not as competent at managing this flooded feeling as I would like to be. And so I don't know how to handle it. The best thing I can do right now is to go into the cave and wait for the dinosaurs to recede. So just like learning to actually verbally articulate to your partner, yeah, okay, here's how I was reacting, but really the like true emotional need underneath is I don't want to hurt you, and this is a lot for me to handle right now.
Yeah. That's really good. I mean, that's so FE. It's like you're not just feeling one thing, you're feeling many things, you know? So
yeah.
How, and you bring up your wife. It's interesting, you and Hillary are both, you are not just in a relationship, but you are classmates as well. That's
Yes.
That's quite interesting. I mean, there's a couple things I want to talk about here. Well, in general, just what is that like?
Mm.
Do you just get sick of being around her? You're like, come on, man, it's like all day.
I not really. It's obviously helpful to have like some time apart and a space to breathe, but for the people who are viewing this or listening to this who are more into the like objective personality side, one thing that they say about people who are sleep last, so me, is that we kind of have like do it with me disease. So like I feel very happy to kind of have like a buddy who's going through this process with me. We're doing homework together. I'm not like feeling that drift, like relational drift, where if we were both doing different things, it might be harder to maintain the relationship. So I feel very fortunate that we're kind of aligned and what we're looking for in life. And, the goal is to have a private practice together. So, I think that it'll all be, we're both going through like a very strenuous experience right now. That is the major drawback, right? It's like, we're both stressed out at the same time, and we're like riding the same wave, and so it's hard for like one person to pick up the slack when we're both like in the thick of it. So I would say that's like the major drawback, is not always having one person who clearly has more capacity. We have to learn to like give and take and really think through how we want to handle the hiccups of life. The other thing, we're both competitive, so I think that that's also been a drawback, academically.
Yeah, man, look at my GPA. Check this out.
Yeah, there's a little bit of like locking horns, like, all right, which I think is fun. And it can be like stressful in its own way, but I think it's also been beneficial. It's kind of like, it's like those twin studies, right? Where like you take two guys born from the same family, but they're living in different geographical locations. How are they gonna, we're doing there, a lot of our variables are the same, yet our personalities are different. And so it's interesting to see how we're both moving through this experience and moving through this trajectory. She's more like connection oriented, so she's been better at like building a network of friends, and I think I'm I feel like a little bit lonelier, and I'm like, oh, these people are like only my friend because they're Hillary's friend. And so that's like, like, because she's like there first, and so I'm always feeling like, that's one difficulty, and one big difference. And then I have been more inclined to like reach out to, I have a professor that I like reached out to for collaborating for research purposes, so I'm like trying to really dig deep on the academic side. Hillary we're working on a research paper together now, so we're kind of doing that together. That should be fun. But yeah, it's such an interesting way to like see your share, like where you're similar and where you're different. And then in terms of like technique, I think we both, having like the NE, we both are really good at asking questions and offering metaphors and analogies that do help with that reframing process. So it's just, it's been really fascinating from that perspective.
Yeah. And to give some context to our dear listeners, your wife, if we're just going to say in dumb MBTI terms, we would say she's like an ENTJ, but in the more highfalutin objective personality terms, technically an ESTJ, TE, NE. Now, what is that like, having the different decider axis there, where you're both thinkers, but you've got the introverted thinking, she's got extroverted thinking. Where do you see that clash? Or even not
I
clash,
think,
just miscommunications.
yeah. I think that I see it a lot in a lot of basic problem solving. So just to give like the first example that comes to mind, I had this laptop that was a work laptop, and the fan was dying, and I'm like, okay, like I got to handle this myself. I need to like buy a fan replacement. I need to install it myself, and I take a lot of like pleasure out of that in a way. Like from my vantage point, it's like, yeah, I could reach out to somebody at the company who could help me with this, but what then I'm going to be like without my laptop, without my particular like TI like way of doing things, my computer's like set up in a way that's conducive to my workflow. Are they going to send me another, there's a whole like, so for me it's like it's easier to just like solve problems myself.
Yeah.
Is kind of like what it boils down to. And that is a place where we like we're not always aligned, or we don't always see things the same, because she's like, hey, like when are you gonna send this to the company? Like when are you gonna you're gonna contact the guy who's gonna do the thing for you? And that kind of goes back to that difference of like, she is more, it's like the connectivity piece, she is like reaching out to people, she's like aware of the resources in the community, who can offer what. And I'm like, all right, gotta do it myself. So I think for me it's been like the biggest thing to learn from, like, yeah, there are people there who can make your life easier, and it might, free up your capacity to perform better in this domain if you're not spread so thin in every domain, trying to solve every problem on your own.
Yeah, well, it's also interesting, the dynamic that I picked up there is like, you figured out the solution for yourself, and then she comes along and is like, why are you doing it that way? Like, that's and it's like, for the TI, it's like, oh, dang, come on. Like, I've spent so long figuring out my why. But at least for you, preferring that, you can be like, well, here's why. Whereas me, I'm just like, okay, whatever, we'll do it your way, because I don't want to have to, like, it bothers me to have to stand on, like, I feel weird saying, well, here's the reasons that I came up with for why I'm doing it this way, that I know is kind of circuitous now that you're bringing up maybe the objectively correct way to do it.
It wouldn't work for everybody.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's like, it may work for everyone else, but I wanted to figure it out for myself. So
yeah.
Because my wife is lead TE as well, at least I think. Who knows? But it's kind of the same thing. I'll have my way of doing things, and she's like, why are you doing it that way? Just do it this way. And I'm like, okay. Like,
yeah.
But you learn a lot from it, because it's like, I shouldn't be so precious about my way of putting together this pathway,
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what's most triggering about it, probably for everybody who encounters a dynamic like that, is it's not just about the thing, right? It's not just about me with the fan and replacing the fan myself. It's like, if I truly take that feedback, then it's about like a worldview shift. Yeah. And it's about like learning, oh yeah, I can rely on other people.
Yeah.
And like, what will that mean? How does that change like literally everything about the way that I live my life?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. So how much longer do you have if we run a few minutes beyond what I originally said?
Oh, I can't go all day, but I can go for a while.
Okay, well, I wanted to switch topics a little bit. We don't need to go on too long, but the thing that will probably be of most interest to the viewers is that you've been a writing partner of mine for a few years now. Yep. Actually, in the last script that I produced that you wrote is the types as therapists, 16 personalities as therapists, which everyone loved. They thought it was amazing. So good work there.
Thanks.
Did any of your clients end up in that script? Were you like inspired directly? Because I know you wrote that a while before I produced it, so I can't remember how far into the program you were at that point. It wasn't that much later that it was like January you wrote the script, I think.
I was already seeing clients, but I don't think anybody directly. I try to be careful not to like put anything where somebody might be like, that sounds an awful lot like my life. But then there are these like very generic archetypal situations, and
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, once you are like working as a clinician, you start to see that like this is like, I've seen this before. Maybe that's my intuition talking, but it's like,
Yeah.
this is all the same. Hang on. Like people come in, people will be like, I know we're going to be an especially hard case for you. Like, buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride. And then it's like the same thing that the person before you just said.
Yeah. That it is interesting. I mean, it can even feel a little deflating if you're the person saying that. I mean, I think people react differently, but you know, it's like, I thought my problem was special.
Yeah.
Whereas some people
I've
will
been
feel
there,
relief.
yeah.
They'll be like, oh, great.
Yeah. It's normal. Yeah. But, you know, the point being, I don't think I drew too explicitly from anybody that I was working with, but I definitely drew from like models that we're learning about, techniques that we're learning about, and I had fun playing with that. Yeah.
What type do you find the hardest to come up with material for? Like a joke or something that seems relatable? Because I can tell you, and the audience can tell you too. For me, it's like ISFPs. I'm always like, I mean, I feel like I give them good jokes a lot of times, but it's usually like a joke that isn't coming from the type so much as it is just a funny joke that is generally for an introvert, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. ISFP popped into my head as well. I think another difficulty can kind of come from like ESTJ and ENTJ. Like I feel like sometimes I'm like, yeah, these are like interchangeable. How do you really like zhuzh it up so that like you're really capturing whatever the difference is there? I think that like the TE DOMs are easy to write for. I just think that I like struggle with like that differentiating factor.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah, especially the EJs and IPs. It is. I feel like to me a lot of times the defining factor of a type is more the feeling or thinking aspect of it. And so with those types, well, a lot of times it is really just like the same scenario could go either way, but you maybe put some more sensory stuff in the language of the ESTJ, and then just kind of broaden stuff for the ENTJ. It would be so much easier if it was just the 8 types. Like it would way easier to make very distinct jokes that landed every time and were specific to the type.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's always, I don't know, how do you write? Explain to me how you write a script from beginning to end.
Holy smokes. As if I have a process.
So I can, tell me your IJ process.
Okay, so I kind of have a template at this point, which just has like just the 16 types with like a dash by each of the types, like a starting point. Usually I'll actually go into that document, go underneath all of the types, and just like jot down anything that seems vaguely funny about the scenario or whatever the concept is. Like, okay, could mention ChatGPT, LOL. You know, maybe anything that just pops into my head, just a complete vomiting of ideas. And then I actually start with the jokes for the most part. I like start to like expand those out, maybe with a loose idea of who it could be applicable to. And then once it finally takes shape, another thing I should say about my writing style in general is that I jump around a lot. So I might have like one line up here that's not even a complete line. I'll jump 5 lines down, tighten up the vomit that's down there just a little bit, and then jump down here. And I'm just jumping and jumping and jumping, and things are kind of proceeding like 15%, 25%, but it's all just chaotically kind of accumulating at the same time and progressing at the same time. So that's a difficult thing about my process, but it kind of also, I think, plays to my type, because I do get really bored and kind of anxious if I have to sit with it and it's not working. So I'm constantly injecting variety of like, I've thought about this one for 30 seconds. Let's jump down to this joke and see if we can make that work. And then, jump down to this one. So it's a lot of channel changing. And then eventually things take shape. And as they're, at 90%, 95%, then I'm really thinking like, okay, is this more ISFP, INFP? Like if I have to like force a decision, and then how can I like slightly revise it or slightly tweak it in order to make it more INFP? And then that's kind of the final product.
Right. Then that's fairly similar to the way I do it too. I'm probably don't jump around quite as much. I'll like stare at a screen at the blinking cursor for like 10 minutes and be like, okay, it's not coming to me. So, but I do find like the best thing to do is to start right until I hit a block and then leave it for a couple days if I have the luxury to do that. Sometimes I don't, but because sometimes you come back to it and then you're like, oh, well, now of course I know what to say next. And other times, other times it comes all at once. Other times it takes days. Sometimes you get like just stuck on one joke and you're like, how do I do this ENFP joke here? It's like, I've done especially because there's so much overlap. It's like, what is the defining thing that makes this one different? And then, at least for me, I get the audience in my head and see all the comments that are like, you always do this with this type, and you, not accurate, you missed the mark this time. Or it's tough because you'll get people who are like, this was too stereotypical. Like I got a comment on my last video that was like, INTJ, please stop making INTJ so stereotypical. But then I'll get other comments that are like, this was not relatable as an INTJ. So it's like, I can't make everyone happy.
Yeah, no, you really can't. That's one of the, I definitely have those moments where I get stuck on a joke and I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to sleep on it. Like, I don't know what to do. I'm going to, like, this joke is going to let down the frisky ponies. It's not going to land. And it is interesting how effective sleeping on it can work. And I remember reading Stephen King's book on writing, and I think that's a piece of advice that he gives in that book. It's like, write up to the point where you still have energy and you still have excitement, and just before you go off that cliff into like, I don't know what the hell to do, that's when you press pause. And so you kind of like ride that wave the next day whenever you get back into it. There's still something there that you've let percolate in your mind overnight. So I try to approach it that way.
Yeah, that's great. That's very useful. Years ago, I had a foray into writing a novel, and that was the only way that I was able to do it, is limiting myself to a word count every day that seemed too low, but that gave me extra. It was like your creative well, if it gets too low, it takes longer to fill up, or you don't have enough the next day. So it's like you've always got to make sure that there's a little bit left. You could do more, but you got to stop. Because from day to day, you might not be as creative, one day to the next. So you need to save a reserve for the future.
Yeah, and it's so easy to get kind of like, I at least for myself, I find that like it's hard to shake a bad mood. So if I do write until I hit the wall, then when I wake up, I'm going to still feel like I'm in that space of, oh, I hit the wall. So yeah, kind of thinking in terms of like the momentum of like the energy and your excitement, I think that can be really helpful. Yeah.
Now, a question or two to put you on the spot is, one of the additional frustrations you have of writing with me is that the process is usually you write and I'll give you notes sometimes, or sometimes I won't, and then I take it and sometimes just like rewrite a bunch of stuff. So what are times where things didn't let's see, so what was there a time where I rewrote something and you were like, What was wrong with that joke? Come on, man. Do you remember? Do any stick in your mind?
Wow.
So I'll just point out that I feel bad because a lot of times the type, even if everything else was fine, the one type I would change is the ENTP. And I was like, Jeffrey can't get into ENTPs. He's got the blind spot. And I didn't know if maybe I always worried that you would pick up on that
That's
pattern there.
hilarious. No, I kind of missed that one. That's really funny. I think in general, no examples are coming to mind. I think maybe most recently we did the rap battle one.
Right.
And I think because I've been like heavily in like the rap headspace, I think I overdid it a little bit. So that does come to mind as like, I think I wrote a lot and then you kind of like shaved it down a little bit and really refined it to like this pristine, crystalline product. I'm really grateful, honestly, for the way that you did it, because I hate to say this, Frank, I literally like made a sports bracket. I literally like bracketed every type and then went down the brackets and down the brackets.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yes. In that original script, there were multiple rounds, even though we only saw maybe a snippet of each one.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I just get overwhelmed as the person shooting it. And I'm like, I like, my mind cannot wrap itself around how I'm going to do this. So, but I also was just like, hey, we can just, like, the audience is not going to follow, even if it's as clear as day. So let's just skip to the end, you know?
Yeah. No, I think that's totally fair. And I think, that's the only thing that really comes to mind as far as like, oh man, there were probably, I don't even have a particular example, but there were probably some dope raps in there that didn't make the cut.
There were some good rhymes where I was like, so I think with that script, what I actually did a lot of times was, besides that chunk I cut, I would take what you wrote and then build off of it, because I was like, some of these need to be longer. Ultimately, it didn't matter because my audience apparently doesn't like rap, so the video didn't do very well. I was like, this is gonna be a hit, and it's like, well, terrible performer. Figure that one out. I don't know, but so I would make some longer, but there would be times where I'm like, I need to end on this rhyme, so now I have to change Jeffrey's dope rhyme to get it to work. And I felt bad during those times, but I was like, for the greater good, we must do this.
I understand. And I mean, to be like completely frank, I think, that's you. I'm sure you've heard that joke so many times in your life. To be Jeffrey, early on, there were times when I was like, oh man, my joke changed. Yeah. And then it didn't take long for me to be like, this is the process. And obviously I'm just like grateful to be able to do it. It's really fun. And, I trust that you like know what you're doing. So I'm happy to surrender that final editorial piece.
Well, I'm glad to have convinced you that I know what I'm doing. Well, here's the inverse of that question. Has there been a time where, a joke you wrote made it mostly unscathed into the video, but the way that I portrayed it was like not what you thought it was going to be, like just the angle that I took on it, whether it's the vocal inflection or the character, because a lot of times, even though you're just writing a line and it is the personality type, you have a character in mind that might be slightly different from what I do,
Yeah.
Or like the intention of the character was clearly different, even though the line is the same. And I know I'm asking you to like think over several years of 3-minute videos, but
no, nothing really comes to mind. I will say this is kind of connected to maybe the last question, but I'm also thinking of the Wonka video.
Oh yeah.
So the Wonka video is one of my favorites. I feel like maybe I offer like a little unhinged energy that really works well with something like that. So I love that video. You did change the ENTP a lot in the Wonka video, now that I think of it.
Yeah, because I basically made it Neil deGrasse Tyson. Like I just...
Well, actually.
Yeah.
And so there's an area where, my intention... I had this like probably overly elaborate, difficult to film thing where like the ENTP is doing the madman kind of monologue that Wonka does
on the river, on
the river. And so Yeah, that also comes to mind as like an example of like, I see why the change was made, but
Yeah, that was,
come on.
and that one was literally just production. Like I didn't know how I would do a Chocolate River boat scene, and I was just like, I got to make it easier. 'Cause so many things when I'm filming, sometimes the edits aren't because of the joke. It's just because I need to make it easier to
Yeah,
execute.
yeah.
And yeah, I don't know over the past years. There's probably videos that got more views than the Wonka one, but I do think that was probably my favorite one we've did, and probably the best collaboration we've done
Mm-hmm.
in terms of going into it with a plan of sort. It wasn't like a plan, but we were like, hey, I think we were like, Mr. Beast did this, let's do it.
Yeah.
You might have even been the one to bring the idea to the table. I forget, or if that was just like one of the random things we threw out there
I
together.
can't remember. Yeah.
But then there was a back and forth with the script, and it ultimately came out perfectly from my point of view. Yeah, that was the height, I think, thus far.
Yeah.
Of course, new heights
Yeah.
to come. The therapist one did very well, so that I think that one was that was a return to form, if you will. So
Yeah, that one was good, especially just being able to draw on this stuff that's very fresh in my mind. And then another unhinged one that I thought was good. I liked the Life Hack Man video. I don't know how that one played with the audience, but
oh yeah,
I thought that was a fun one.
yeah, that one was good. It didn't perform well initially, though. I think it caught up later a bit. And I think it's just so difficult with this particular audience. You don't always know. It's at 348, so it's almost. I mean, that's pretty good. But day one, I was like, this is bombing. Although
Yeah.
I think yeah, day one it had 60,000 views, which might sound like a lot, but at that time, that was not. That was.
Yeah.
So my watershed, the thing that I had been wanting it to hit every day was like at least 70K in 24 hours. So if a video didn't hit that, I was like, it's a failure. Now I'm lucky if a video hits 50K in 24 hours. So I'm like, okay, times are changing. We need to.
Yeah.
But it's weird because I feel like the algorithm works a little differently now, where these videos perform worse at first, but the same over time. So
I
it's
see.
like
Yeah.
in a year or two's time, which is a long time for sure, they will be the same. But in the first couple weeks, they're gonna look vastly different.
Mm-hmm.
Which it's just one of the interesting waves you ride on YouTube. I'm trying to let me look through and see what other good ones. I mean, they've all been good. Let's be honest, folks. But what are the greatest hits of our writing partnership here? You've done a lot of school-related ones.
That's true. Yeah. I feel like that's such an easy, universal thing to tap into. So I really like doing those.
Yeah, I forget. Did you write the bullies one? Not the types as bullies, but the types getting bullied.
I can't remember.
Let me look. Sometimes, usually I try to credit you in the description, but sometimes I hit publish and I forgot. And I'm always afraid to tweak descriptions after I've published something.
Oh, yeah.
I get that fear, like I'm gonna ruin everything if I change anything at all. But yeah, like the types in a group project. I think that was one. Types on the last day of school. That was a fun one.
Interacting as families, I thought was good.
Oh yeah, interact. That was a bit of a high concept one with the different quadra as families.
Also, the romantic movie.
Oh yeah, that was a really good one.
Well.
Romantic movie. That was a lot of fun to put together. Because of all the production elements that you put into it, like the music and everything, and making kind of allusions to other things. The types interacting in class, types picking a college major, I believe. We worked on.
That was actually the first one that I did, I believe.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. I could be wrong.
I mean, I would. That sounds right.
Yeah.
But regardless, the types is villains. You did.
Oh,
We did
yeah.
that, right?
Yeah, we did that.
Yeah, that was a banger.
Oh yeah, and essentially the survivor one, voting each other out.
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't even touch on your typology raps. You've completed the. Let's just, before we put a bow on it, let's just touch on that. The MBTI raps. You finally finished the what would a set of 16 be?
Yeah.
How do you feel?
I feel good. I feel conflicted. I got a lot of feelings. Surprise, surprise. It's been like a long time coming. I started doing them, I think, like right at the beginning of COVID, and I love rap music. So when I had that idea to like make type raps, I was like, man, this is killer. This is like what I'm built for. This is integrating so many things that I'm into. So, a lot of initial excitement, but then, it was like a long slog. It took me a while to get through them. So, partially finishing them was just like, it's like, I just need to do it to be done with it. And I still want to do it well, but right now I want to be done with it. So it feels good to close out that chapter, and I'm especially once I kind of like assembled a track list, and I try to think about the flow between all the songs and kind of make it work. I'm really pleased with the way that it turned out. It's on Spotify, it's on YouTube. Hit it up.
What was your favorite one to do?
In terms of, okay, so the ENTP rap is the rap that is most in alignment with what I look for out of rap. So it's kind of like clever, a little more verbal, inspired by, a lot of what I think of as like more technical rappers. So I tried to bring that to the table for that song, and I think it's really fun, bouncy, but at the same time, a little bit of a lyrical miracle, you know what I'm saying? Maybe even at times spherical. So that was my favorite to write. And then video wise, the ESFP one was once Hillary became like a permanent fixture of my life and we started spending a lot of time together, she was helping me with videos, and so she had a lot of good ideas for making the ESFP video really fun and like, partying it up, just having a good time, kind of trying to encapsulate that mentality. So that was a really fun video to make. And then same with what I think of as like the closing track, the ISTJ track. I tried to make something that I thought would be moving and, heartfelt, even though it's also a funny, stereotypical rap, stereotype personality rap, because the whole thing has been very tongue-in-cheek. I'm like kind of poking fun at these types while celebrating these types, and then the ISTJ is sort of this archetype of rigidity. I am who I am. I do my thing each and every day the same way. And so I wanted to close with that song as like a statement about like, hey, everybody who's into personality is kind of like, we kind of treat it as a straitjacket sometimes. And so just like this little ISTJ in this song is learning to allow for that process of metamorphosis, hey, maybe we can all change, and maybe we can all not be so rigid even as we celebrate these really fun personality ideas.
Yeah, that I really like that. What is the the general reception you've gotten? I assume has been positive on your channel. Have there been any unexpected comments that you've received?
I mean, some people are just like, I don't like rap. What is this? Or
Jeffrey, I don't like rap. No one should be putting rap out.
Or people, there's nothing like too unexpected. People like don't like the rap about their type, but they like other raps, or people resonate with like really weird things. You were talking earlier about that trying to walk that line of, is it relatable or is it too stereotypical? I've had people be like, yo, the INTJ rap is so sick. I have a hurdy-gurdy, and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like that's the worst line in the song. I can't believe that is something that somehow resonates with people. So that's really surprising and interesting. And then the other thing that's kind of shocked me was on the INFJ rap. That's the first one that I did. One of the comments, it seemed like an innocuous, generic comment, but there was something about the profile picture that like rubbed me in a weird way. So I clicked into the profile, and it's like some woman who was like a ghost hunter famously back in like the 90s and early 2000s, and
Whoa.
she was on talk shows. So she has like clips all on her page of her like not being on Maury Povich, but on things like that, things of that ilk. And so I'm just like, what a fascinating person to have like stumbled upon, like into this world that I'm creating here.
Yeah, that is you don't really expect a ghost hunter who was famous in the 90s to be watching your videos. Yeah.
No.
It is funny, how people latch onto things that you don't expect, and they're like, that's the relatable thing, because a lot of times they're just like specifics you put in there that kind of illustrate the broader point, but then the specifics somehow relate to the person. You write a joke about I only own navy blue clothes, and then people will be like, oh my gosh, that's me, I only own navy blue. Yeah, exactly. I think your INTJ rap is probably my favorite of them all. If we can just base that off of, it's the one that gets stuck in my head all the time. Like it might shock you to hear, but it'll just be like, I'll just be walking around and I'll hear the chorus going on in my head. So
you can't know what it looks like.
Yeah.
Man, so that's interesting. I at some point want to do like a like tier list for all of my songs. I would probably put the INTJ personally at the bottom, or pretty close to the bottom.
Was that like your first or second one?
I think I did INFJ, then INFP, and then INTJ.
Okay, yeah. So why is it at the bottom for you?
It's a little too fast. Like, I don't think that it sounds natural. I'm like really trying hard to keep up with the tempo of the instrumental. The lyrics some of the lyrics are pretty good, but like the hurdy-gurdy thing is like such a throwaway. I feel like I could have tried harder to craft the lyrics, but get played like a hurdy-gurdy. I'm an INTJ living in 3030. I don't know. Hurdy-gurdy, I feel like that was like a low-hanging fruit, a desperate move on my part. So yeah, there are pieces that I'm not fond of, but then I have a friend who I've talked to about this. I'm like, I hate the INTJ rap, and then he's like, yeah, but I hate INTJs, and it's like, it's perfect for like, it really encapsulates the INTJs. But yeah, I don't know, it's okay. I do like one of my favorite lines that I wrote in all those raps is in the INTJ rap, which is just like, oh crap, I'm gonna forget it now. Basically, people often say that I must be fun at parties, but that's hardly the case. And then it kind of goes on, like, just like the obliviousness of like, people say that I must be fun at parties, but I'm not fun at parties. Like the INTJ kind of like missing the like the social cue underneath it. I think that's really funny, just personally.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny in general how people will like this. They'll latch onto and like the things that you either don't recognize as being good or that you actually hate. And I've found that, I think throwaway lines are necessary. Like sometimes you just have to have a throwaway line to make the other lines look better, because that the audience is going to be like, that line's not very good, but then it's like a trick. They think the other things are better because they have the comparison of the worst line in there.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah,
I do that sometimes with the comedy sketches too, where I'm like, this joke is a throwaway, but it's short and it's between two others that are going to get boosted theoretically because of this one. Although on YouTube, you don't know. People might just be so quick to click away that you can't afford that. I forget where I first heard this. What song? It's like a songwriter famously said to put a throwaway in. It might have been, I don't, the two I'm thinking of, it was either Freddie Mercury or like Cole Porter. So it's like not similar at all, but one of those two is like, you got to put a throwaway line in there. But then people think the throwaway line is great, and then you'll have this baby of a joke that you're like, this is the funniest joke. It cracks me up when I read it, when I see it acted out, or my favorite line of the rap. This is so clever, and no one mentions it, and you're like, guys, like, what's going on here? Why do you not relate to what I think is the most funny thing?
It's the most awesome. But thankfully, I think I am in agreement. Like, nobody has ever embraced my least favorite line of the INTJ rap, and so I feel good about that. Like, I'm imagining it's universally hated, which is I'm kind of getting at that like INTJ prepper mentality. And I say, I'm a visionary, even when that vision's scary. I got a mask for dystopian dysentery. Like, preparing for the future, wearing some like weird gas mask to prevent you from getting any futuristic dysentery. I hate that I use the word dysentery in the INTJ rap. It's just that I can't stand by that.
Yeah, and no one's been like, dude, I don't want to get dysentery either.
No, that one doesn't seem to resonate whatsoever.
I feel like you'd be more likely to get a bunch of comments that are like, what does that mean? What is dysentery?
Yeah. What is dystopian dysentery? Like, I don't know what we'll talk about that in 10 years.
Yeah. Did you run out of steam with them? Obviously, you've completed it, but did you feel like there was ever a point where you were running out of steam? Because there's the obvious thing on YouTube where it's like, YouTube, and I feel like the internet in general, where the IN types, they sell like hotcakes. Everyone wants to watch videos about them, but like you knew going into the other types, that the ESTJ rap, the ISFP rap, they're not going to perform as well as the IN types. Did it ever cross your mind, I don't even want to bother writing these things?
Yeah, definitely. Especially when I realized, like, I'm somebody who has like a very poor relationship to time, and so once I realized like how long it was taking me between each one, and I wasn't like proactively trying to make it happen, I'm like, oh, this is going to be a long project unless I really change my approach. And so at a certain point I started to think, is my moment over? I already did like the really like obviously popular ones. I got the right out the gate, INFP, INFJ, INTJ, like hitting those big, those big sellers.
Yeah.
And so, I started to question whether it'd be worth it to do the whole thing. But I've always had people kind of clamoring like, I'm so ready for the ISFJ, I can't wait. And I'm like, it'll be fun. I will enjoy it. And there are still people who are like wanting to listen. So for the sake of completion, for the sake of always liking rap, wanting to have my own rap album anyway, like I might as well see the course here, follow it through. And so I'm glad that I did.
Yeah. No,
and it can be surprising. Like ISTP, it was one of the last ones I released, and it's so much more popular than like it's accelerating at a rate that I did not expect, and it's more popular than the ISTJ, which fair enough. And it's more popular than the like rap album as a whole, like that I released as a video at the same time. So it's just getting more views than I expected.
Yeah, I think that the ISTP is the next hot thing out there, the next hot type.
It's coming.
Because I see that one requested more than any other one, or people, in a 16 personalities sketch, they'll say, oh, ISTP, blah, 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 which is a little surprising to me, but I feel like maybe it makes sense. Like that's the type that is it's the sensing type that is most acceptable to be, because it is, maybe it's the TP part of it. Because you have to think that if Myers-Briggs statistics are correct, and it's like, ISTJ or whatever is the most common type, why doesn't that translate to popularity on the internet? Because they're not just making up these statistics.
Right.
Is it purely just, and then even the 16personalities.com claims that, these other types are the more popular ones from their tests. So how does it end up that the IN types are the only ones searching things out?
Right. Even if those tests aren't good, or even if those typings aren't accurate, those people theoretically would still be like seeking out content and
Right.
Entertainment relevant to that.
Yeah. So the only thing I can figure is that it's because the type of person to get those scores is just the type of person who is interested in that kind of stuff, even if they aren't those types. And maybe now there's some kind of shift where people feel like it's acceptable to be more honest, at least in the ISTP preferences on those tests. The kind of people who are interested in self-growth feel like it's okay to be more honest about those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
If that makes any sense. But that's interesting. I get people requesting all the time ISTP specific.
That is, yeah.
Because I am not like you in terms of completism, where I'll do some of these videos that are about a specific type. I'll do, the series of INFJ girlfriend or whatever. And
Right.
I can see a steep drop off even just from INFJ, INTJ to INTP or INFP. It's like the J types dominate for some reason. So it's like, I do see in the comments lots of people saying they want different types, but I just know that doesn't translate to actual, like a scalable amount of
Right.
viewers. Yeah. But now I'm curious to see how well an ISTP video, well, not how well it would do, but how much better it would do than I expect it to do. Because I would have previously expected it to bomb so badly that it would, make me want to stay in bed. But but maybe it would do okay. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's something to be said for the ISTP being life hack man, and
yeah,
I think there's energy there. I'm also thinking it's almost like the ISTP is the INFJ's like hot cousin, like there's something similar there. You got the TI, the NI, they're relatively accessible. I don't know, it feels like a very natural extension, where if maybe INFJ content is getting a little stale for people, then this type is like easier to assimilate. It's part of that appropriately unusual.
There you go. Yeah, I think and it might also just be because it's like people who would say they're INTP, except that the stereotype seems to just be like so nerdy. It's like, I'm not a nerd, but I relate to the I, the T, and the P. So I'll just say, I'm a realist, and I feel like there is a certain type of, and this is kind of just anecdotal based on what I'm seeing, like in the comments, women who test as ISTP, like I think there's like a specific type of woman who knows they're not nerdy, but also knows that they're like logical and introverted. That test a lot as ISTP. Like I see that a lot, and men too. But I guess it's more unexpected to see a lot of women ISTPs.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's given me a lot to think about, Jeffrey. I'm gonna think about making an ISTP video more seriously now.
Yeah. Okay. Beautiful.
Any other parting thoughts here? Now that I've done one false ending, should we have a second false ending?
Oh, goodness gracious. Yeah. Let's parting thoughts. I feel like we were pretty thorough with the things that I figured we would talk about and wanted to cover.
Yeah, I mean, it's like hearing about your psychology exploits here, your escapades in therapy. It's been fascinating. Like, I've loved hearing about it. And you have one more year left in the program, is that right?
That's right. 1 more year. I'll be done in May of 2024.
Wow.
So,
and is it
under a year now.
From there, do you jump right into trying to get a private practice, or is there another step?
That's possible. That's definitely a valid pathway, but it's not what people normally do. So, right after that, I would be like an associate. So I wouldn't be a fully licensed marriage and family therapist. I would need 2 more years of at least 2 more years with a supervisor kind of like helping me talk through what's going on and just, verifying that I'm doing okay, that I'm not harming anybody with my therapy. But theoretically, I could immediately start a private practice and just like meet with a supervisor independently of that practice. Oh, wow. Most likely I'll stay where I'm doing my internship experience as a therapist and hopefully have a supervisor there. And then private practice, like, a couple years down the road.
Wow. Yeah. We'll have to, bring you on the podcast, which I'm sure will stretch out in perpetuity for updates as you go along.
Yeah. Well, I'm really hoping and excited for the possibility of integrating these typology concepts into therapy. I've thought about like completely like rebranding my channel and calling it like type therapy, something like that.
Oh, that's
and just
good.
Like trying to integrate all the stuff that I'm learning.
Maybe integrating rap into therapy as well.
I've thought about doing like a rap-based project, just like explaining like, here are the different model developers and here's where they were in history, and now we have a neat little rap that helps us remember all these basic pieces of information that will be on the final exam.
Oh, that's really good. That's got viral potential.
Yeah. There are a lot of good channels actually by marriage and family therapists who are watching, trash reality TV, applying what they're learning. And that also seems like there might be something there that I want to tap into.
Oh, yeah, that's good. I get a lot of those recommended too, where they're like, what is going on with these people? Yeah. Well, Jeffrey, thanks so much. We'll call it there. And officially for the podcast purposes, goodbye.
Goodbye.